When I was around 9, there was this girl I used to hang out with after school. I'll call her Liv. She lived just a few houses down from me in this quiet cul-de-sac where every family knew each other by name. It was one of those neighborhoods where people didn't stress much about safety. Folks left their doors unlocked, and kids ran around until dinner time without a second thought. Liv's house, like many others, had that setup where the garage was basically treated as the front door. Most people didn't even use their real front doors. They'd drive in, leave the garage slightly open for pets, and come in through the side door that connected straight to the kitchen. Across the street from Liv's house lived a couple with 2 sons. The older one was in high school, and the younger one, Tim, was in his 20s and had some developmental challenges. He was always outside, smiling and waving at cars like it made his day. Everyone in the neighborhood knew Tim. He was harmless, always cheerful, and just kind of did his own thing. One day, Liv caught a nasty bug and stayed home from school. Her mom had a half day at work and was due back around 2, so Liv stayed in bed resting. She locked the house up, except for the garage door, which was left open just a crack for their outdoor cat to slip in and out. That part probably wouldn't have mattered much, except Liv later realized it might have made all the difference. Around mid-morning, she was woken up by someone knocking, hard, at the front door. She peeked through the peephole and saw Tim standing there. She opened the door just a little, and Tim said he'd noticed she was home alone and wanted to keep an eye on the house for her. Liv thanked him, said she was okay, and wished him a good day. But something shifted in his face. His smile vanished, and he blurted something like, "You think I can't help because of how I am. But I'm not dumb. You'll see." She tried to explain she didn't mean it that way, then shut the door and went back to bed, still feeling groggy. Not long after, she was jolted awake by a noise from the kitchen downstairs. At first, she thought maybe her mom came home early, but when she looked at the clock, it was barely past 10. She stayed quiet, listening. There were footsteps, heavy ones. She darted into her parents' bathroom, but then remembered that door didn't have a lock. So she slipped into their walk-in closet instead, tucking herself behind hanging clothes and holding her breath. She watched through the narrow gaps in the closet doors as someone stepped into the room. It was Tim. He was tall, lanky, and standing just feet away from where she hid, and he had a kitchen knife in his hand. He didn't say anything, just started looking around the room like he was searching for something. Then he went into the bathroom, where Liv had been seconds before. She could hear him muttering to himself, the kind of muttering that made your stomach twist. And then he started pacing, loud, angry steps all through the upstairs. She didn't move an inch. Even after the front door slammed shut and the house went quiet again, she stayed in that closet until she heard her mom's voice calling out from downstairs. When her mom found her, she was in tears. Liv told her everything. Her mom was about to brush it off as feverish confusion until she noticed a knife sitting by the front door, one that definitely hadn't been there earlier. The police came and took a report. Liv never talked about it again. Years later, we ended up living together for a short time in college. She never brought up what happened, but I noticed little things. She checked the locks more than once every night. She added an extra lock to her bedroom door. Even living on the 7th floor of a secure building, she'd triple-check the windows. It was like something deep inside her never fully came back from that day. I sometimes wonder if there was more to it than she let on. We were just kids, and maybe she didn't know how to explain it all. But I've never forgotten what she told me, and I've never looked at unlocked doors the same way since. This happened a few weeks back, and it still replays in my head more often than I'd like. I live in a mostly quiet area in the South, the kind of place people call comfortable, where neighborhoods are tucked in between farmland and strip malls, and the most drama you'd usually hear about was someone's mailbox getting knocked over. But lately, things have been shifting. A bunch of new apartment complexes started popping up nearby, and with them came a noticeable uptick in reports of theft, missing kids, and shady stuff you used to only hear about on the news. I work at a small vet clinic a few blocks from my house. It's a simple gig, kennel tech, mostly cleaning up after dogs and cats, keeping things tidy, and doing whatever else needs to get done. I'm 17, still living at home with my mom and stepdad, and since I don't drive, I usually get a ride to and from work. But not that night. That night, I walked. Greg, who was supposed to help with the evening shift, bailed last minute, so I ended up staying way later than usual. After scrubbing kennels, mopping floors, and dealing with a full house of animals alone, I was exhausted. My boss had already left, and I was the last one there, locking everything up. It was around 8 p.m. when I finally stepped outside. This time of year, thanks to daylight savings, it was already pitch dark. Only the parking lot lights and a few street lamps lit the way. I'd just finished locking the front door when I noticed 3 guys standing near the mailbox across the lot. They were too far to see clearly at first, but close enough that it made my stomach twist. This isn't a commercial area, just homes and a park nearby, so there's no reason for anyone to be hanging around the clinic that late. They weren't talking, just loitering, watching. I tried not to make eye contact and started walking, keeping to the sidewalk like I didn't notice them. But after only a few steps, I heard quick footsteps behind me. I didn't wait to figure out who it was. My keys were already in my hand, wedged between my fingers the way my mom taught me for self-defense. I spun around, rushed to the door and fumbled with the lock. Just as I managed to turn the key and shove it open, I felt something grab at my sleeve. The door slammed behind me, catching whoever it was right on the hand. He screamed, an awful guttural sound, and I didn't even stop to look. I tripped through the doorway and hit the tile floor hard, landing face first. Everything from that point was a blur of adrenaline and fear. I crawled away from the door, my heart pounding so fast I could barely think straight. I tasted blood, realized I'd busted my lip and eyebrow when I fell. The alarm was blaring, echoing through the building while the dogs started barking like crazy. Outside, those guys were banging on the back door, yelling the nastiest things I've ever heard. One of them locked eyes with me through the glass, and I've never seen someone look at another person like that, like I wasn't even human. I crawled under the counter and stayed there, frozen. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly, just trying to disappear. I didn't think to turn the alarm off. That ended up being the one good thing I didn't do. After about 15 minutes of them screaming and banging, it all stopped. Turns out the alarm company had called my boss after I didn't input the code, and she told them to send help. The police found me unresponsive, still under the counter, barely aware of what was happening around me. I don't remember much from that point on, only flashes, officers, lights, my parents showing up. They told me later that the 3 guys were caught nearby at the CVS down the street, trying to buy finger splints. The one who grabbed me broke at least 2 fingers in that heavy door. Another had apparently face-planted trying to run after me. I won't lie, I found that part a little satisfying. After reviewing security footage, we found out they had been lurking around the clinic on and off all week, probably waiting for a moment like this when I was alone. I just never noticed because I'd always had a ride or stayed late with coworkers. All 3 had active warrants, drugs, assaults, you name it, and one was tied to a string of break-ins not far from my neighborhood. I'm supposed to testify in court soon, so I've got their court dates saved in my calendar now. That night could have gone in a very different direction if I hadn't managed to get back inside when I did. These days, I don't walk home alone, not even for a few blocks. I always make sure someone knows where I am, and if I'm working late, I wait for a ride. I never expected something like this to happen where I live, but now I know better. I didn't really plan on moving out of my old apartment. If life had gone differently, I'd probably still be living there now. But last year hit me like a truck. I lost both my mom and my fiancée within months of each other, and trying to carry on like everything was fine didn't fool anyone, especially not my closest friend. She wasn't having it. One day she just told me to pack my stuff and come live with her. At first I resisted because leaving the apartment I'd shared with my fiancé for over 10 years felt like letting go of everything. But being alone all the time was becoming unbearable. So I agreed. Her place was in a quieter neighborhood, nicer too. And once I settled in, I realized how much I needed the change. Our schedules didn't overlap much. She worked nights, I worked during the day. But we always made time to hang out on our shared days off. I even started walking to work since it was just a short walk through a small park. It felt like one of those little perks that come with change, like things might be slowly shifting for the better. But that 10-minute walk introduced me to something I really didn't need. One evening, I decided to stop at a bench in the park on my way home from work. It had been a long day, and I just wanted to sit for a minute, scroll through my phone, maybe listen to a podcast. That's when this man approached me. He looked worn, but not threatening. His face could have been considered attractive under different circumstances. Probably in his 40s, unshaven, sun-weathered skin. At first glance, I figured he was just another guy out for a walk. I looked down at my phone, assuming he'd pass. Instead, he stopped in front of me and asked what time it was. I looked up to answer, and that's when I noticed all the random junk he was carrying. A broken CD rack, an old chalkboard scribbled with nonsense, and a paper bag full of magazines and loose papers. He had no shoes on, and his hands were caked in dirt. That's when I realized he wasn't just passing by. He launched into a chaotic monologue, part rambling, part oddly clear. He mentioned being recently released from prison, said he was looking for a tattoo shop where he could get F the Doc tattooed on him because he had racked up 34 violations while incarcerated. He wanted the Department of Corrections to pay for it. Then, his eyes landed on a pin I had on my bag, the logo of a local LGBTQ+ bar. That shifted his energy. He told me he'd gone to that bar before and hooked up with a guy once, but young ladies were his real problem. He said it in a way that made every hair on my neck stand up. I grabbed my bag and walked off without saying another word. That should have been the end of it. Just a weird encounter with a guy who clearly had issues. But things escalated in ways I couldn't have expected. My bedroom has a sliding glass door that opens onto a gated patio that faces the street. It's great in the summer when you want to hang out outside, grill something, or just enjoy the breeze. But after what happened next, I started seeing it as a huge security flaw. One morning around 5 a.m., I was jolted awake by a loud voice screaming, "What the fuck are you doing?" It sounded like it was coming from inside my room. I shot up, heart pounding, only to realize it was outside. A neighbor had been heading to work early and found someone, him, curled up sleeping right against my sliding glass door. The same man from the park. The neighbor scared him off and checked in on me, and while I was shaken, I chalked it up to an awful coincidence. Maybe he didn't even realize it was my apartment. But then, 2 weeks later, he came back. It was around 2 a.m., and I woke up to the sound of tapping on the glass. I didn't move. I just lay there in the dark, listening, trying to stay completely still. The tapping grew louder, more aggressive, until he started kicking the door, full-on kicks like he was trying to break it open. I turned on the light, reached for my phone, and he bolted. When the police came, they reviewed the building's camera footage, and it confirmed what I feared. Not only had he been on my patio more than once, but he'd also slipped into the building behind other residents multiple times. He'd sat for hours in the lobby, wandered the halls, even tried the doorknobs to my place and my neighbor's apartment. There's footage of him hiding in the small mailroom when he saw my roommate walking in from work, watching her pass by. The police think he either recognized me from the park and followed me home, or had noticed me at some point while I was on the patio. Whatever the case, I haven't seen him again since that last incident, and none of my neighbors have reported anything suspicious. My roommate bought me pepper spray, and our ex-military neighbor, who's more than a little enthusiastic about security, now checks in on me most nights just to make sure things are calm. It helps a little. But still, every time I pass by that park or unlock my sliding door, I think about him. The way he looked at me, the weird things he said, and how determined he seemed to find me again. I can't shake the feeling that he wasn't just passing through, and I hope whatever kept him away keeps him gone. I used to cut through a stretch of woods between my neighborhood and the one behind ours. It wasn't a deep forest or anything, just a thin path tucked between two fence lines. But it was convenient, and I used it constantly. I was around 13 at the time, and being a latchkey kid, I had a lot of independence. My parents worked late, and as long as I was back by a certain time, no one really asked too many questions. I'd often walk that path alone to visit my best friend who lived a few streets over, usually with an overnight bag slung over my shoulder. One late afternoon, I was heading over there again with my backpack, just like a dozen times before. As soon as I stepped out of the wooded shortcut and back into the open residential street, I noticed a white van parked nearby. It was older, with paint that looked faded from sun exposure, and no windows on the back. Not gonna lie, it gave off weird vibes. You know the kind of van that shows up in every safety lecture? This was that van. Two men were sitting up front, and something about how they were both staring at me without blinking made my stomach feel twisted. I tried not to look like I noticed them, but every few steps I'd sneak a glance. Sure enough, the van crept forward, very slow, just rolling along the curb behind me. I could hear the tires crunching gravel. At first I kept walking, thinking maybe I was just freaking myself out for no reason, but the van stayed right behind me. It wasn't subtle. The moment I turned a corner, I bolted. I sprinted harder than I ever had in my life, and even though my lungs were screaming from the asthma I tried to pretend I didn't have, I kept going until I reached my friend's front porch and pounded on the door. Her dad answered, saw how out of breath I was, and asked what happened. I told him what I saw, and he stepped outside to take a look. But by then, of course, the van had disappeared. He shrugged it off like I had just spooked myself, maybe watched too many late-night horror movies, and nothing more came of it. I didn't expect to see that van again, but not even a week later, I was heading to her house again with the same routine: cut through the shortcut, emerge on the next street, backpack in tow. And there it was. Parked in a slightly different spot, but close enough. Same van, same two guys. This time they didn't look away when I saw them. One of them smiled like he'd been waiting for me. I froze for a second, just long enough to realize I couldn't turn around. They were too close, and if I did, they'd probably catch up to me before I made it back through the woods. So I took off again. But this time, they didn't hang back. The van roared to life and started rolling behind me, picking up speed. I ran harder than I knew I could, cutting across the grass between houses. I could hear the tires skidding behind me, then the loud creak of the passenger door swinging open. One of the men jumped out and started chasing me on foot. He was heavy-set, moving fast, but not fast enough to be a real sprinter. I knew I had a small chance to outrun him if I could keep moving. I panicked and tossed my backpack behind me, hoping it might hit him or slow him down. I heard him stumble, maybe trip over it, but I didn't stop to check. I just ran until I reached my friend's porch again, banging on the door like my life depended on it. Her dad answered again, this time with wide eyes as I gasped out what had just happened. He called the police right away. When they arrived, they found my backpack in a neighbor's yard, but the van was long gone. The part that still unsettles me the most is how deliberate it all felt. Like they'd been watching. Like they knew I walked that same route at the same time, alone, and they were just waiting for the right day. A few weeks went by without incident. I stopped walking that way completely, and my friend's parents started picking me up instead. I hadn't heard anything more until a letter came from the local police department. It was addressed to my parents and included a neighborhood alert about a man who had been recently arrested for attempting to abduct another kid not far from where I'd been followed. The letter explained that he had a record, that he'd moved to our town a few years earlier as a registered offender, and that he hadn't been monitored closely enough. Attached to the letter were photographs of both suspects. I didn't even have to read the names. The second I saw their faces, everything came rushing back. That was them. Even in the grainy black and white copies, their eyes looked the same. Too fixed, too intense, like they weren't just looking at you but through you. I never found out what happened after that, whether they stayed locked up or moved somewhere else. But I don't think I've ever trusted a quiet street the same way since. That summer, I was working full-time at a small college in the South, living in a quiet neighborhood not too far from campus. My days were pretty structured: morning lectures, afternoons spent at the student resource office. Then I'd head home around 9. The house I rented with my roommate was this little 2-bedroom place tucked away near the end of a cul-de-sac, the kind of street where nothing ever really happens, and everyone waves at each other while mowing their lawns. Most of the cars in our area were newer sedans or family SUVs, and that's why I immediately noticed when this busted-up old truck showed up. It was sitting near the entrance of our street one night as I was pulling into the driveway. The thing looked like it belonged in a junkyard, paint chipped in patches, one headlight dimmer than the other, and the engine making this faint sputtering noise. I stayed in my car for a minute or two, watching it from the rearview mirror. No one else was around, and the truck wasn't moving, just kind of sitting at a weird angle like the driver couldn't decide if they were turning or stopping. After a while, it finally crept off toward the main road. I didn't think much of it beyond it being a little odd. Maybe someone was lost. Inside, I locked up, fed my dog, and made some late dinner. My roommate wasn't home yet, which wasn't super unusual on Thursdays. He sometimes worked late or grabbed drinks with coworkers. Around 11, I was folding laundry in my room, just zoning out with a podcast on, when the power cut out. Now, we didn't have storms that night. No wind, no lightning. It had been a hot, clear day, and the night was just as still. I tried flipping the light switch a few times just to be sure. Nothing. I called my roommate to see if he was on his way back, and he said he'd be home in 5. That made me feel a little better, so I figured I'd wait for him, and then we'd take a look at the fuse box together. I hate going down to the basement alone anyway. While waiting, I went to the front door, the one with that little stupid diamond-shaped window right at eye level, and tried to see if our neighbors were out too. But all their porch lights were on. Even the street lamp outside our house was lit. Just us. I was typing out a quick reply to a text from my mom when I glanced back up, and that's when I saw him. There was a guy standing underneath the streetlight, just a few feet from our yard. I swear he hadn't been there before. He was tall, maybe late 40s or 50s, wearing jeans that looked like they hadn't been washed in weeks, and a dirty white t-shirt. He had scruffy hair, round glasses, and a smug look on his face like he'd already gotten away with something. He wasn't doing anything at first, just standing there. Then he started walking slowly, really casually, right toward our porch. There was something about the way he moved that chilled me. It was like he knew I was there, even though he couldn't see me through the dark. He kept glancing around, like he was trying to be careful not to get spotted, like he knew the routine of the neighborhood, like he'd done this before. My dog, who usually flips out over every squirrel or car door slam, was totally silent. Didn't bark once, which somehow made the whole thing worse. I felt like I was the only one in the world who knew something was wrong. Right then, my roommate's car turned onto the street. His headlights swept across the guy and froze him in place. For a split second, the man turned and looked directly at the car, and something about that look told me he recognized it. He bolted before the car even made it all the way into the driveway. Just took off into the night, disappearing down a side yard. My roommate slammed on the brakes, jumped out before even closing the door behind him, and rushed inside, grabbing the hatchet we kept in the utility closet. He ran outside again, ready to confront whoever it was, but the guy had vanished. We called the police, and they came by and walked the area with flashlights, but no sign of him. The power company sent someone out too. Apparently, the box attached to the nearby pole had been manually flipped. Just ours, not the neighbors'. When I asked the technician if that could have been done on purpose, he just kind of shrugged and didn't give me a real answer. We had a trip planned that weekend anyway, so we packed up early the next morning and left town. I don't know if that man came back while we were gone, and I don't really want to. From then on, I made it a rule never to be home alone at night, and within a few months, we moved to a different part of town. During spring break a few years ago, when I was still 17, I used to visit my older siblings who lived out in Tempe, Arizona. My hometown was dead boring, especially during school breaks, so getting out to the city always felt like a little adventure. While they were off at work during the day, I'd wander around by myself, just exploring random areas, riding buses, and finding little places to shop or eat. One afternoon, I decided to head to the mall using the Orbit buses, which are these small, free city buses that loop around the area. To get there, I had to transfer lines halfway through the trip at one of the bus stations. Everything went smoothly on the way to the mall. I spent a few hours window shopping, grabbed something to eat, and then started making my way back before it got too late. At the bus station, while waiting to transfer to the second bus, I started chatting with a guy who looked like he was about my age. He seemed friendly enough, and I asked him which bus I should take to get back near my brother's place. He pointed out which one was mine and said he was headed in the same direction, so we got on together. We talked for a bit on the bus, just casual stuff, until he got off a few stops later. I waved him off and put my earbuds in, zoned out to some music, and just watched the city go by. I must have gotten way too relaxed though, because at some point I started noticing that the streets outside didn't look familiar anymore. The neighborhoods looked completely different than what I remembered from earlier. I grabbed one of the printed maps they have on the bus and realized I had taken the wrong line. It was already getting dark outside, and my phone battery was at 3%, so I knew I didn't have much room to mess around. I figured I'd just wait it out since these Orbit buses run in a loop, and I'd eventually make it back to the transfer station. As I tried to figure out how long that would take, the last few riders got off the bus. That's when the driver started talking to me. He called out, asking if I was lost. I explained that I'd gotten mixed up with the buses and was just waiting to loop back. At first, he just nodded. Then he did something that threw me. He turned off the main road and drove into a dark, empty neighborhood. There weren't any streetlights around, and no one else was in sight. The bus slowed to a stop at the side of the road. I assumed he was just ahead of schedule and was waiting out the time. But instead of staying in the driver's seat, he got up and walked back toward where I was sitting. This guy was tall and solidly built, probably around 6 feet and close to 200 pounds. He grabbed one of the maps and sat down way too close to me. He started asking me all kinds of personal questions. Stuff like what bus I was supposed to take, whether I went to ASU, how old I was. And then finally he asked, "Is anyone waiting for you?" That one made my stomach twist. I told him my brother was expecting me and that he'd be worried if I didn't show up soon. He stood up and walked back toward the front, and for a moment I thought the weirdness was over. But instead of getting the bus moving again, he shut the doors and killed the lights inside the bus. Now it was pitch black in there, and the only sound was the hum of the engine and my own heartbeat thudding in my ears. I could barely make out his silhouette as he walked back and sat down next to me again. I couldn't keep it together anymore. I jumped up, ran full speed to the front, and started banging on the doors until they finally popped open. As soon as I squeezed through, I just bolted. I didn't even stop to look back. I sprinted through this unfamiliar part of town, past rows of closed shops and empty intersections, until I finally spotted a cell phone store that was still open. I ran inside, practically in tears, and begged to borrow a charger. Thankfully, the person working there let me plug in my phone just long enough to call my brother. I gave him the name of the store and told him I needed him to come get me right away. When he finally pulled up and saw the state I was in, he was furious. I explained everything to him, and he said he was going to report the driver to the transit company. I never found out what happened after that, and I really wish I had gotten the driver's name or bus number. All I know is that after that night, I never used the orbit again without someone else riding with me.